In this additional video in regards to artillery firepower, I'm going to cover some of the additional restrictions on artillery fire, counter battery fire, how artillery fire affects enemy artillery batteries, and artillery officers. First thing up, whenever you fire artillery, at no point in the game, or the fire phase in this particular, can more than 2 batteries engage a single enemy unit with firepower. The third battery cannot engage the same unit as the prior 2 batteries unless there are no other possible enemy formations or units within its arc of fire. In this case, it's quite obvious. We've got Austrians and Prussians over here, so this battery would have to fire upon these other units, and only these 2 batteries would be able to fire upon the open, unscreened cavalry. So the golden rule is you can never fire more than 2 batteries at an enemy unit, unless the third battery has no other possible target at all. Next, let's go into counter battery fire. Drop in a little battery here. The Baden's volunteer, shall we say. These 2 guns fire upon this battery. What's the effect? Well, the effect is you reduce the number of cannon in the battery. Unlike infantry fire, when they fire at a battery, if they actually score a hit, you remove the crew, and therefore by default remove the battery, because there's no longer any crew. Artillery fire reduces the number of cannon in the battery, and it's the same for either round shot or case shot. It reduces cannon. So you go through the normal process of firing the guns, and typically an artillery battery is a 1/3 target, unless it's in a massed artillery situation. We'll cover that in a moment. So it's a 1/3 target, so if you started with 73, that would work out to 25%. You get the hit with a 25% or lower, it would cause the loss of 1 gun. And you'd put a 1 gun loss marker, usually typically at the forefront of the battery, so both players can see it. Once you get another gun lost, you might flip the marker over and you have a 2 gun loss marker, which means from here on out, when the 6 gun battery of cannon is firing, you subtract the 2, so it's only going to use 4 guns for fire purposes. Whenever you get a hit on an artillery battery, with round shot, it causes 1 cannon loss. If you get a hit with canister shot, though, it causes the loss of 2 cannon automatically. And each time you get a cannon loss on a battery, you have to roll on the artillery critical hit table for potential additional effects and damage to the battery. In some circumstances, it has no effect. In other circumstances, it could be a catastrophic explosion, or it could be the loss of additional guns and counter batteries. But in most cases, what you'll achieve is something called a counter battery action. And there's 2 counter battery actions, counter battery A and counter battery B. Counter battery A result means the enemy battery, i.e. the Badeners, on its next possible fire phase, whenever that is, in any sequence of the game, if it elects to fire the guns, it must, if possible, fire at an enemy artillery battery. In other words, return fire. You've attracted the attention of the gunners, they're pissed, and they're going to fire back at you. That's what's going on. Even though there might be some friendly infantry over here which they want to shoot at, much fatter, juicy target, they're going after your own guns. And that would be reflected by putting a counter battery A marker at the front of the base. The other result, of course, was counter battery B. Flip the marker over. And counter battery B means instead of you having the option to be silent, you must fire back at the enemy artillery and expend ammunition in the process. Counter battery A's and B's, once you've gone through the fire sequence when you had to go through the requirement, are automatically removed. So if you got a counter battery A and you went through a fire phase, and instead of optionally shooting, you just elected to be silent for that fire phase, typically a mutual artillery fire phase, you just remove the marker, and from there on out, the battery's going to act perfectly normal. It can engage whoever it wishes to, until it gets into the counter battery, for instance. But if you had a counter battery B, you must engage the enemy at your next possible opportunity to shoot. And once you've done that action, you would then remove the marker. It is possible for guns to have several counter battery A's or several counter battery B's, or a mixture of both, placed on all at the same time, especially if it lost a lot of guns in the same fire phase. Anytime you lose a gun, it's a down 1 morale check for the crew. If you lose 2 guns, it's a down 2 morale check. It's a temporary downing of the crew value until you get to half strength of the battery. Then it's a permanent half strength loss modifier for morale, plus the additional guns which you're losing. So cannon battery is quite simple. If you happen to shoot at a train unit, that's where you have a chance of getting an actual explosion on the tabletop, which can cause a lot of damage to the surrounding units. It's a lot of gunpowder going up all at once. Now, I mentioned earlier the concept of massed artillery. Well, the gamer's saying, what's the definition of massed artillery? And it's quite simple. It's having more than 16 guns or cannon within a 6-inch radius of your battery, and you include in that count of 16 guns your own guns. So down here, let's look at this example. We got 8 guns in this battery. There's 8 guns over here. There's 8 guns here, and there's 8 guns here. So in theory, I've got a grand total, counting friendly guns, I don't count the enemy, of 8 times 4, or 32 guns. If there's any definition, this is definitely a situation where there's massed artillery in this area or this zone of the battlefield, and consequently, all these batteries are going to be considered massed. And what does that do from firepower? If the Bodners are firing at you, instead of it being a 1/3 target, you now become a 2/3 target. Effectively, you're doubling your damage against yourself. But that's the penalty, because you've got all these guns and all these trains and wagons and all that stuff tightly densed together on this battlefield zone. So in recap, you just take the battery which you're aiming at. Let's say the Bodners want to shoot here. And they're going to say, okay, you got 8 guns there, you got 8 guns there, that's 16. We're okay, we've only got 16. But looking over here with a 6-inch radius off the edge of this base, oh, there's the 17th gun right there. It's actually 8 more. This makes this battery automatically massed. And if you did the same zonal or 6-inch zone around the cannon, for all the cannon within that 6-inch radius, you'll find that all these guns are going to fall into that play. Even this one on the end, because it's going to count here and here, plus its own cannon. So this is definitely a case of massed artillery. It doesn't do anything for your fire effect going out. In fact, it's very deadly when the player's faced against by a massed battery, because there's a lot of artillery fire coming at it. And think of the French Grand Battery of artillery. When you get a couple of 12-pounders here in a row, it's not pretty to see. Last but least, there's something called an artillery officer in the game. And here he is for the day. He's riding along. And if an artillery officer actually joins, or he puts himself in base-to-base contact with a battery, he gives that battery a benefit of an additional 1/5 towards its firepower effectiveness. So if this was 100%, he just increased this gun to 120% base firepower. Up 1/5 is what we say. Now, they also have the ability to do one other unique thing. If there's batteries directly adjacent, like this one, he's going to extend that up 1/5 to this gun too. So now you got 2 batteries up 1/5. Note the officer has to be attached to a battery. So he's vulnerable to any counter battery firing being aimed specifically at this battery for possible officer loss. But this gun's not attached, so it does not get the 1/5 benefit. But if the player was to actually move his guns in a position where they would be attached in base-to-base contact, like this, then all 4 of these guns get the benefit of the artillery officer up 1/5 for each individual battery's firing. As you can see, this can become very deadly and very efficient, but only very few nations have the artillery officer capability in certain time frames of the year. Basically, the French have it all along, the Russians have it, and the late period Austrians and the late period Austrian and Prussians, 1813 onwards, have it. Pretty much everybody else in the European theater of operations do not utilize artillery officers. The other thing an artillery officer does is he overrides the rule that you can only fire 2 guns at a single enemy unit. Like prior, we had only the 2 batteries firing at the cavalry. Now, if all these 4 guns actually bear on this cavalry regiment, the artillery officer can summon all their battery commanders and say, we're all firing there. And in effect, you can fire all 4 batteries, if they bear in the arcs and templates and all that stuff, at the enemy cavalry unit, in this example, the Prussian cuirassier. So, the artillery officer has the ability to direct fire directly upon units, and he ups the firepower on top of that. Nice little bonus if you happen to have them. But only the French, basically, and the Russians in most of the wars have it, and the Russian one has got special restrictions that if he's ever lost on the battlefield, then the Russian artillery reserve rules go into play, and basically it stops the movement of some of the reserve cannon. So there is a penalty for them. If the officer is not attached, it's just hanging around, No benefit is given other than the fact he might give a morale benefit for the artillery crews from his morale benefits of being in the zonal 9-inch range. Okay, the next subject is going to cover some of the more unique forms of artillery fire and the use of howitzers, rockets, and mortars.